Welcome to Lesson 4, Part 2, Audio Interface, Bit Depth, and Sample Rate. Welcome to Sam's Music Room. I'm Sam. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope everyone is doing well. Part 1 of audio interfaces, we discussed interface connections, inputs and outputs, and briefly touched upon MIDI, SPDIF, and ADAT. And audio interfaces are also responsible for bit depth and sample rate. So let's get a little techie, but just enough to understand what we need to without going crazy. And we'll come back to bit depth and sample rate in later tutorials when we set up our DAWs. For now, just an overview. Bit depth. What is bit depth? Well, it's the number of bits of information in each sample rate, and it directly corresponds to the resolution of each sample, which is important because we want as much resolution as we can get in our audio samples. So bit depth has a big impact on your sound. And the simple math is 1 bit equals 6 decibels of sound. So that means 16-bit audio, which is no longer the standard, has a total dynamic range of 16 bits times 6 decibels for 96 decibels. Now the problem is that the digital noise floor is pretty high, and the remaining dynamic range is pretty small. So the result is that if you work at 16-bit, the quieter sections of your audio will tend to be noisy. So 24-bit, which has a range of 144 decibels, gives production professionals and us the range we need to proceed to process audio smoothly. For a perspective, each sample recorded at a 16-bit resolution contain any one of 65,536 unique values. But with 24-bit, you get 16,777,000 unique values. So it's a huge difference. And since 24-bit is almost standard with audio interfaces, here's a case where we can easily achieve pro standards without spending pro dollars. So that's a brief overview of bit depth. Sample rate is much more subjective because each sample is a digital snapshot of the captured audio. And the old standard of 44.1 kilohertz takes 44,100 digital pictures of the incoming audio every second. Digital to analog conversion only needs 2 samples, the top and the bottom, of a waveform to generate a frequency. So the 44.1 kilohertz sample rate is theoretically capable of reproducing frequencies as high as 22 kilohertz. Now the uppermost range of human hearing, young females, is 20,000 kilohertz. So technically 44.1 kilohertz is more than enough to capture and reproduce every sound you can hear. However, and as we've said before, there's always a however, the additional considerations may or may not suggest that higher sample rates capture valuable information. That's why most audio professionals choose to work at 48K or 88.2, 96, 176, and sometimes even 192. Here again, we can accomplish pro standards at no additional cost, because most interfaces will go up certainly to at least the 48 and many to 96, and then sometimes only the more expensive ones go to 192. The question though that's so debated is, are there any real advantages to these higher sample rates? The concern with these higher sample rates for hobbyists is CPU requirements, because when you get up to 96,000 or 192,000, these files put a strain on your CPU, possibly causing glitches, pops, clicks, stutters. And then the second part of these high sample rates is that they use a lot more file space because there's so much more information in them. So those are things that you have to consider when you're thinking about these higher sample rates. But just so you know, Apple suggests for uploading to iTunes that you use a minimum of 48K, but they say you're even better off with a higher sample rate to add more detail to compensate for their compression algorithm. So in other words, they're taking your files and they're compressing them. And they're saying because of the noise floor that if you have more detail in your samples by using a higher sample rate, that your tunes will come through this compression with greater detail if you record at a higher sample rate. And again, it's debated. There's an ongoing argument about whether that's true or not. But if it is true, then these higher sample rates will add more detail. And that would be a good thing, right? I suggest you start at 24-bit 48K, and you might still want to test a few tracks on higher sample rates to see if your computer can handle it and to see if you can hear the difference. Because if you don't hear a distinguishable difference, don't put the strain on your computer or on your file system. So that's an overview of sample rates. And I would also just check to make sure that your audio interface hits at least 24 bit depth and a 48K sample rate. It's pretty much standard. Even your $100 ones should do this, but just take a look to make sure, because you're going to want to be at 2448 as a minimum. And if your new interface does 32-bit and up to 196K, that's great. We'll talk about these higher rates in more detail later. However, for now, 24-bit 48K is going to accomplish most everything you need in your recordings. So lesson 4, part 2 has ended. Thanks so much for watching. If you like the videos, please subscribe. Look for a new video every Friday, and I'll look for you next time on Sam's Music Room. Bye now.